Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Ikigai Leadership. I'm Dr. Drew B. Harrell, and I'm here with Dr. Steven Kirsch. Steve, great to meet you. Thanks for coming on today. I really appreciate the time.
Dr. Drew, hey, great to be here.
Absolutely.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, so Profit Minds, it's business coaching for those of you who don't know, and from a particular different lens, right? And as Steve knows, every coach has their own little lens that through which they see the world, through which they help their clients see the world. And so what's your lens? What does it look like for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting because my lens is quite different. I'm a scientist, and I like to understand things in some level of detail before I describe or prescribe some kind of a solution. And life is an experiment.
Yeah.
So we'll try something, and if it doesn't work, we'll try something else. And I've learned a lot over my years. That's how I got the gray hair.
Oh, you earned the gray hair, right?
I earned it. Yeah. I earned every one of them. That's right.
Yeah. So tell us more about. I know you're a PhD in physics, right?
Yep.
How do you go from being a PhD in physics to being a business coach?
Yeah. So it is kind of an interesting story. The first job I had out of graduate school, my wife and I both got jobs working for IBM in New York, and moved there. And I had no desire whatsoever to be a manager in the IBM system, because a manager couldn't do anything technical. And I loved the technology, and I loved being on the cutting edge of developing new technologies. That was the reason that I became a physicist in the first place, was to discover new things. And the IBM system required that managers be managers, pure and simple managers. We had a minimum of 30 people reporting to you. And that meant all you could do was manage.
Yeah.
I've been at IBM for 8-9 years, something like that. And they did their first layoffs. And it was at that point I realized I needed to take responsibility for my own career. When I joined IBM, I figured I'd be there for the rest of my life. You were called an IBMer. And that was the expectation. But when they made that change, I said, well, I better do something about this. So I started passing out my resume, and a guy from Intel called me and recruited me to come to California, which is where I am now. And also convinced me that I could be a manager, because at Intel, you could manage a team of 3 or 4 people and do technical work at the same time. And so for the rest of my career at Intel, even though I was a manager almost all of that 22 years, I was also able to contribute technically. So it was a good balance.
Yeah.
But a few years into my time at Intel, I was offered the opportunity to take the class, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. They were rolling it out to the entire organization. 1,500 people were going to take this. They were taking 3 to 5 days off-site for every member of the organization. That's a huge investment.
Yeah.
And I found the course transformational. In fact, they were looking for instructors because, again, they're rolling it out to everybody. And I put my hand up, because I know the best way to learn something is to teach it.
Yeah.
So I became a certified facilitator, and I've been able to do that now for over 25 years. And one of the other cool things about Intel is that each senior leader, I was director level at that point, is required to teach at least 3 classes a year, every year. It's a way they perpetuate the culture. And I loved the teaching. I loved watching the students' eyes light up as they got it, some new concept. And over time, I got introduced to and certified in a number of other courses of that ilk, personal productivity, organizational effectiveness, those kinds of things. And I found that I really loved it. And the other pivotal thing that happened to me while I was at Intel, this is 2008, so almost 15 years ago now, or 15 years ago. I was member of the senior staff for the factory that was here in Santa Clara, and we announced, or were told we had to announce that we were shutting down the factory.
Oh, wow.
800 people were going to be displaced by that single act. And what we did as a leadership team, I was chief of staff to the gentlemen who were running the factory at the time. What we announced, the entire leadership team said, we made the commitment to every employee. We said, we will find every employee a successful new beginning.
Wow.
We didn't define what that was like, what that was going to be for them. We also put together courses to help them figure out what it would be. But the fascinating piece of that was that those employees, we had a turnover in the factory, and here in Silicon Valley, turnover's pretty high. We were probably averaging somewhere between 15 and 20% annual turnover within the factory.
That's huge. Jeez.
Right. For the 18 months, and by the way, we announced the shutdown, and it was 18 months later that the factory was actually closing. So we needed to keep those people to do the things that needed to be done. And our turnover dropped from over 15% to around 5%. And the reason was because we made a commitment to the people in that organization.
Yeah.
And they understood that. We delivered for them. I would be willing to bet that of the 800 people that were displaced, there were less than 10 that didn't have a successful new beginning.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so you combine those, my real discovery of the enjoyment of teaching. I taught in graduate school, of course, but it wasn't the same. Right. But my enjoyment of the teaching of some of these fundamental business principles, and combine that with the value of understanding how important it is to tend to your employees.
Yeah.
Those two things combined. So as I started to contemplate this thing they call retirement, which I did now more than 7 years ago, I said, boy, it would be fun to continue that as a business coach. And so I hung out a shingle.
Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, there's a couple of things I wanted to cover in there. Like you said a lot, and I wanted to touch on a couple of things. But the first thing actually that I'm most curious about, honestly, is actually kind of a tangential thing that you mentioned just in passing. But being part of Intel during the 90s, right? And IBM and Intel both during the 90s with the advent of the Pentium chip, right? What was that like? And for some folks who are here who are not as much as a nerd as I am, if you wouldn't mind sharing what that is, but yeah.
Yeah, well, so the Pentium was the big breakthrough for Intel in terms of the microprocessor, and really set Intel apart as the leader of the microprocessor movement. Now, I arrived as the first Pentium was being certified, and I took over the organization that was actually responsible for the failure analysis of those devices as they came through.
Wow.
So I was really there, sort of in the heart of it at the very beginning. And
you're like
and
right on the cutting edge.
Some of the people that I worked with and for were solving those problems that in the reliability space. I was part of the quality and reliability organization at the time, and it was a magical place.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, IBM was a great company. It is a great company. But the thing about Intel that was really, and it impacts the way I coach, by the way, as you might imagine.
Sure.
Andy Grove was chairman at the time. He's one of the founders. And he's got a couple of management books. And I think the thing that stuck with me the most and was most in practice at Intel was this idea of management by objective, or key performance indicators. KPIs is what we call them today.
Mm-hmm.
OKRs is another, objectives and key results. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different ways of saying this, but it's what gets measured gets managed.
Yep.
And that's so critical to the way I work with my clients. We develop KPIs, leading indicators. Every salesperson that's worth anything, that does anything that's worthwhile for a company, knows that you don't keep track of, well, you do keep track of how many sales you make. But the primary thing you count is how many calls you make.
Yeah.
Because it's a leading indicator of your success.
Yep.
It's both predictive and it's influenceable. Those are the two characteristics that make a successful leading indicator.
Yep.
It's predictive. That is to say, the more calls you make, the more deals you'll get, right? And it's influenceable. You can decide how many calls you're going to make today.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't get that, right? I mean, I think a lot of people look at the results and they're like, oh, we're not getting the results I want. Well, okay, well, what are you doing to get those results?
What are the behaviors?
What are the behaviors you want to do? And they're like, oh, well, I just make calls, or I network, or I talk to people, or whatever.
Right.
Okay, how many people? And you break it down, like you said, what gets measured, right, is what you need to measure. What the key performance, you have to measure what you're doing, so you know what the outcomes look like, and so eventually you know what your cost of acquisition is. You know what the actions are to get to the point where you get customers. And a lot of business owners, and in this situation, I use that term a little loosely because some people get in the business and then they're not meant to be business owners, right?
Oh, yeah. That's a different problem. We could talk about that too.
Yeah, but you get into the situation and you're like, okay, well, I'm not getting results I want. Okay, well, what actions are you taking, right? And then they're like, oh, well, I'm doing this. Like, okay, how many calls are you making? How many emails are you sending? How many meetings are you attending? And if they can't give you that answer, then they have to start looking at those kind of things, right? That's
right.
Yeah.
And you have to know what's working in each step of the process, right? Mm-hmm. How many calls do you make? How many follow-ups do you get? How many emails do you send? How many of those get opened? How many of those get clicked on? Mm-hmm. And all of those things, that there are, and you can look them up, right?
Yep.
There are standards for what is a good open rate, what is a good click rate. And if your open rate isn't good enough, well, then you probably need to look at your subject line. If your click rate isn't good enough, you probably need to look at the content.
Yep.
And if your close rate isn't enough, well, maybe you need to talk about or get some help with your closing script or whatever that is, right? But measure each one. You need to know the top of funnel to the bottom of the funnel and the rate for each of those things. It's I like to say, look, it's not rocket science.
No, it's not. But
I can do rocket science, and trust me, this is not rocket science.
Right, exactly. And it's simple, but it's not always easy, right?
No, that's absolutely true.
Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks don't take the time to break it down like that, though. They're like, oh, I'm having these sales calls. Well, what do they sound like? What do your sales calls consist of? Right. Well, it consists of me just finding out what other people do and tell them what I do. That's a networking call. It's not a sales call, right? You're not going to get any business that way. So you got to break it down. And that's I mean, someone like yourself, having that much experience in that world, in the world of technology, and then coaching as well, and teaching, right? What are some of the most common challenges? I mean, obviously that would be one of them, right? Sales and marketing and that kind of thing. But what are the most common challenges you come across with clients?
Well, I think you said it very well, right? The people that get into business, they get into business because they're good at what they do.
Mm-hmm.
They're not good at business. That's not where their passion is.
Right.
So they need another set of eyes, a coach perhaps, somebody to help them. Sometimes it just takes a mentor. Yep. Sometimes an accountability partner is enough. But very often, a coach will really help you understand what it is that you're doing and what you could do better. But just an independent set of eyeballs.
Yeah.
And by the way, I call myself a coach-sultant because this whole thing about being a business coach and you're not allowed to tell them what to do. Well,
Yeah,
sometimes you gotta tell them what to do.
you have to. Absolutely.
And
Especially in the business
so
coaching world, right?
eh,
Especially
eh,
because if you're meeting
right.
them where they are, there's an element of teaching and
Mhm.
consulting that has to go into that. Coaching, I don't think people can understand the distinction between coaching and consulting, right? And there is a distinction. And I'll tell you honestly, most of my clients that I work with, whether they're business owners or whether they're executives or leaders in organizations, in the beginning, there's always some element of consulting that has to happen, right? It's just a matter of switching that from 60-40 consulting to coaching to 10 or 15, percent consulting
Right.
coaching to like 85-90% coaching, right? That's just
Yes.
reality.
It is. And oh, by the way, out here in the Bay Area, we have a basketball team. The Golden
Do
State
you, man?
Warriors.
Oh, I'm not,
Some people
that
may
sounds
have heard of
familiar.
them.
It sounds a
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
familiar. I'm
Yeah.
not sure who's on that
And
team again.
yeah, I know Steph Curry, I think, is one of the guys that plays on that team.
Oh yeah, Stephen Curry. Yeah,
Arguably the best shooter ever, right?
yeah, that guy's insane, man.
He
Amazing.
he has a whole bunch of coaches,
I
right?
believe it. I absolutely believe
And
it.
I'd be willing to bet that Steve Kerr, the head coach of the Warriors, doesn't spend a lot of time helping Steph Curry to connect with the basketball and make sure he really has his feelings in order around the basketball, right?
Right, right.
No, he says, go there, pass here, cut there, get the ball back, shoot, right? I mean,
Mhm.
he designs these plays and he's great at it, but he
Yeah,
tells the players what to do. And sometimes a coach needs to do that.
yeah. And
Sure,
that's
they
where
have
I
to
talk
help
about.
off motivation too.
Yeah.
But does that make Steve Kerr not a coach? I don't think so.
No, I liken sports teams. I think sports teams are a great analogy, right? I liken sports teams to organizations in the sense that you have a team coach, right? The
Mhm.
person who's coaching the whole team as you go. And eventually you might coach one-on-one here and there, but then on top of that, you have your star players or the players that are key players in the team will have their own coaches as well, right?
That's right.
To work on different things, whatever that might be, right? You have a coach, you can have a coach to work on basketball wise, you can have a shooting coach, you can have a dribbling coach, you can have, a mindset coach. And again, those coaches can be the same person if the skill set aligns,
Right.
or they can be three different people, right?
Right. But everybody that's at the top of their game has at least one, if not multiple coaches. I
Yeah,
have coaches.
yeah. I mean, I have coaches, and I also coach other coaches.
Right.
We coach each other a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
Coaches end up training services for that reason, right? And the ICF, whatever opinions people have about the ICF, good or bad or ugly, they do have a mentor coaching option as well, where you can get credit for those kind of things, and they have that for that reason, because
Right.
there's an element of necessity in mentor coaching to take your coaching to the next level. Because once you get through the certifications, right, no one's there's professional development, obviously, right, but there's no one sitting in with you saying, hey, if you ask the question this way, or what if happens if you ask this question instead of that question, or because we all get into our own heads, we get tunnel vision, right,
Right.
in our own lenses, right, going back to the whole lens conversation. We have our own lens, and we get really focused in that lens, and we start missing things. We start having our own coaching blind spots, and so a coach helps you uncover those, right?
Absolutely.
So who've
Yeah.
been the folks who've influenced your coaching in terms of like the other your coaching partners over the years that kind of got you started on the path?
So there are a couple of people that I want to call out.
Mhm.
The first was my mom. She's been gone now for almost 30 years.
Yeah.
Isn't a day that goes by I don't miss her. But my mom was the world's best listener. And if I have any capability of listening, it comes from her. I have to tell a funny story.
Yeah, please.
My mom, I am sure, if Guinness kept track of this, would hold the world's record for the longest wrong number phone conversation.
How long was the conversation?
So somebody called, she picked up the phone.
Mhm.
45 minutes later, she hung up. Dad said, "Who was it?" Mom said, I don't know. It was a wrong number, but he needed to talk.
Wow.
That was my mom.
That speaks volumes about who she was as a person. I mean,
doesn't it?
You know, like it's funny on one side, but on the other side, it's actually that person on the other end of that line lucked out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And, you know, I've had a whole bunch of different coaches along the way. But I have to say, I think the most inspirational person that I'm connected with right now is my partner in Profit Minds, Randy Haken, who was employee number 6 at Yahoo, was a venture capitalist for a number of years, and has now started an organization called the Gratitude Network. We've been around for, about 10 years now, and I've been on the board for the last 7. And it's a leadership development organization for social entrepreneurs. And we work with scaling companies and leadership development for organizations, not-for-profit organizations that work with children and youth around the world.
Wow.
And
That's
Randy is in that phase of life where he is just giving back. And he's such an incredible person and so thoughtful about how can I help.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I would say Randy is that person for me that's been most influential in terms of how I do what I do.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, you got 2 great examples, honestly. You know, your mom sounds like she sounds like she was your first coach experience, right?
Yeah.
And then Randy sounds like he's doing some amazing work, man. That's great. And the Gratitude Network sounds like a phenomenal organization. Are there opportunities for folks to get involved outside of you know, it's like a layperson who's listening to this, maybe might want to get involved in that. Is that something that people can get involved in at any level, or is it something where you have to be a certain level or certain?
No, absolutely. I mean, to be a coach, of course,
sure,
you need to be a certified executive coach.
Absolutely.
And we have, you know, the people at the highest caliber donating their time to these amazing organizations. We estimate over the past 7 years, the roughly 200 organizations that we've been helping the leaders expand, that they've impacted more than 45 million children.
Wow, that's amazing. That's awesome.
But go to gratitude-network.org and check us out. Obviously, you can donate and become involved. We do have some opportunities there to even sponsor an organization that's going through the program. And obviously, if people are coaches and want to get engaged, we're always looking for great people to help.
Fantastic. And one more question before we kind of wind down a little bit here, but I want to go back to your time at Intel and IBM versus Intel in terms of the dynamic you felt with being asked to be a manager, right? And so many people run into that, right? When you're a subject matter expert, you're great at what you do and you have a passion for what you do and you want to be creative in that field, right? And then someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, Steve, you're doing amazing work and we love what you're doing. Now I want you to stop doing it and do something totally different, which is management," right? What did that feel like? Because I'm sure so many people listening to this right now are going through something similar, right? Or have gone through something similar. What do you advise people to do? What's your advice, your consulting side of things? What's your advice for folks going through that right now?
So I think it goes back to what my mom taught me is listen and care about the people. By the way, I never really took off my technical hat at Intel. One of the things that I'm most proud of is that because I did a wide variety of things. I was never in any one job for more than 4 years, I think, in my 20 2 years at Intel. But I have patents in almost every sub. I've got more than 10 patents.
Wow.
In almost every sub area that I was, I have a patent in design. I was never a circuit designer. I have a patent in, we were working in liquid crystal on silicon, LCOS technology. And I have patents in that field, right? It's not something that I studied at any point in time.
Right.
I have patents in failure analysis and X-ray inspection and all kinds of things. And so I never took off the technical hat, but I always cared about the people. I'm going to just give you a real quick example.
Sure, please do.
My last position at Intel, I was brought in as a leader of an organization that was falling apart. I'd gotten a reputation as somebody who could hold organizations together.
Yeah.
And again, because I cared about the people. And one of the things that I said to folks in my team, I had about 40 people working for me at the time. I said, I want you to come to work every day excited about what you do. And if you're not excited, come talk to me. And I'll find you a project that excites you. And if I can't find you a project that excites you, I'll help you find another job. And in the last couple of years I was working at Intel, that happened only once, that somebody came to me and I couldn't find her a job that she was really excited about. So I helped her find a different job.
Yeah.
And her career took off. Because excited, engaged employees are the best.
Yeah.
And they won't ever leave you. It doesn't matter how much somebody else offers them. It's not about the money.
Yep. And that's my whole thing, right? I say that all the time. It's not about salary. They don't leave bad salaries. They leave bad leaders, right? If the leader doesn't care about the person, it doesn't matter. I mean, and going back,
they leave a bad manager. That's absolutely right.
Exactly. Going back to your 2008 story about Intel, about shutting down the factory, right? The fact that you guys saw such a drastic change in turnover, when they know the factory's going to close, they could easily just be like, all right, screwed, I'm out. You know what I mean? I'm done. They're closing anyway. What's the point? They stuck around, right? Because you guys cared. You showed you cared, right? And you promised them, you made the commitment to them, and you showed them, put your money where the mouth was, right? And showed them, hey, we're going to help you. We're not just going to like throw you off to the wolves. And I think a lot of companies can learn something from that nowadays, because there is this, or has been this, disrespect and disregard for employees, and people thinking, oh, just throw more money at the problem, right? If you throw them on more salary, we'll still cut their medical benefits, we'll cut their vision, we'll cut everything, cut their vacation days and whatever, or give them unlimited vacation days, which is not a real thing either. The reality is, like, you can have as many vacation days as you want as long as you're working.
As long as you get your job done. And by the way, there's 80 hours of work to do every week.
Right. It's like, that's not a vacation at that point, right? And that's just disregard for the employees, right? And I think more companies need to hear that story and get back to that, where they care about the employees and put them first, because they're people. They're not just numbers on paper, That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, thanks so much, man, for sharing. Time actually flew by. I didn't even realize we're done already. But it's been great. I really appreciate the stories. You got some really, really amazing experience. And again, like I said, I'm a little bit jealous because you were around right at the cutting edge of the golden age, I call it, of computing, really, because that's when everything started changing so rapidly. And nowadays, they have so many cool things, right? But back then, that's when things were changing so rapidly, right? It's like the technology age has started right there. So
yeah, it was lots of fun. It was exciting. It was a wonderful place to be. I feel so fortunate that I was able to be a part of that.
Yeah. Well, I feel fortunate that I got a chance to talk to you and have you on my show. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your time. And everyone else, if you want to reach out to Steve, his information will be in the description below. And please feel free to reach out to him and say thanks. But thanks a lot, Steve. I appreciate it. Take care, everybody. Stay safe. Hope you enjoyed this episode. And we'll catch up with you soon. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks a lot.